Hi everybody, this weaving kit tutorial is for people who have this kit to make this nice soft baby. So there should be a sticker on the box around this area which will have a picture of this wall hanging, and this is the specific tutorial to make this wall hanging. Hello everybody, I'm Sky Carter. Welcome to my studio and my YouTube channel. I hope to share with you lots of interesting tips and hints on not just my weaving practice, but other things I do in my studio. I'd love to hear any feedback that you have, any suggestions for tutorials, anything that I might have run through too quickly. Please comment, feel free to subscribe, hit the bell, all the usual things, and I look forward to sharing my love with you. The weaving kit that you've received has everything that you need in it except for two things. So you will have to take a moment to go away and grab yourself some scissors and also some kind of a template that you can use to wrap yarn around. So I've got this handy little canvas from a $2 shop, which is what we call them in Australia. And we're essentially going to use it to wrap yarn around it like this. This is approximately 20 centimeters, and that is a good length for the wall hanging that we're doing today. If you get something that's larger, there is a risk that there won't be enough yarn in the kit for you, because everything is relatively well measured out for this particular kit. So if you can find yourself something that's about 20 centimeters and hit pause while you go and grab that, and then we can move on with the tutorial. Well, this is the fabulous box that you get. So let's have a look at what's in it. Oh, it's the unboxing. It could be a whole other video. So what you receive is a ball of cotton. Now, we're not actually going to be using this in our tutorial, but this is an essential part of your weaving arsenal. So because you get a loom and the weaving tools in there, and we'll be working through a specific wall hanging today, what I encourage you to do is get completely addicted to weaving, and then you can use this to warp your future looms. So we can just set that aside and save that for future projects. We get a little booklet in here, and this essentially is a little support document. So it's a step-by-step of how you approach any wall hanging, particularly a small wall hanging that's made on this loom. So it's not a step-by-step in here for this particular wall hanging. It's a general FYI for all wall hangings. So it's just a little memory prompter for things like how you thread. The first step is that you thread a loom, then you create a header. It also talks you through the steps that you use to remove your wall hanging from the loom. So it's a handy little support document post this tutorial. So that's another element that you get. Then of course we get the loom, which will be wrapped up in some brown paper. And the loom comes with several tools. Now this loom I should say, and these tools are all designed by myself, and they're made using bamboo. So this is the loom that we're working with. This is my double-sided weaving comb. This is my heddle, which works with the loom, and you'll see that in a minute. This is a stick that we can use to hang our work from. And this is my chunky tapestry needle, which will also make more sense when, a needle's a needle, right? But you'll understand a bit more about this when we start weaving. Then, I'll just move this out of the way. Then you get your little bundle of yarn. Ooh. So it's everything that you need to make this particular wall hanging. This one. So we've got a couple of balls of beautiful soft alpaca. We have some variegated yarn. So it's a little skein of this yarn, which you'll need to carefully sort of unwrap and make sure it doesn't get tangled when you're dispensing it for use as well. But it's a very lovely yarn with a bit of pink and grey through it. And then we've got this really lovely soft 100% Australian merino roving. So that's what we'll be working with today to create our gorgeous little wall hanging. The first step to creating a wall hanging is to thread our loom, and we're going to thread our loom to create warp threads, which is what we weave across. So what you need to do is get your cream coloured yarn, take the cuff off the yarn, the cardboard cuff, and find the end, and then just start to kind of unravel it a little bit and pop the ball on the floor. And that's going to roll around and make it a little bit easier than if you just got it on the table. Because what we're going to be doing is we're going to be wrapping the yarn all the way around this loom. So what we do to begin with is we get a long piece and rest it through one of the notches at the top. It doesn't matter if it's the left or right hand side, it's whatever feels comfortable to you. And we want the beginning of that yarn to be at least as long as the loom, if not a little bit longer, like so. Because we just want enough to be able to tie it off at the end. Then I'm going to hold it with my fingers or my thumb, once again, whatever feels more comfortable, because as we wrap around, we want to be able to create tension so that when we strum those at the end, they're not loose and kind of crisscrossing each other, they sort of snap back into their place. So I've got my back here where I'm holding with my fingers. I've got my front here. I'll just turn it around so you can see. I'm actually securing it with my thumb. And then I'm just going to the corresponding notch at the bottom, back up, and around and around. So I'll just show you, this is what the back looks like. And I'm just going all the way around. I'm pulling firmly. Until I reach the end. Feel free to pause. I'm probably going a little bit faster than you because I've done this a few times. So if you have not reached the end yet, just pause the video and then I'll show you how to tie it off. Hi, welcome back if you've paused. Okay, I'm just grabbing my scissors. This is the initial bit that we had. So I'm just going to cut another long bit off the ball of yarn. At the back of the loom, you'll see that the beginning and the end bits of yarn meet together diagonally across the back of the loom, and we're going to tie that off just in a double knot or a bow, whatever works for you. If you need somebody to kind of pop their finger in the middle for you, if you're not able to kind of get a good firm tie. So that's my tied off bit. You'll notice at the back that the warp threads are slightly crooked. That's because they're kind of reaching up to go to the next notch. But if we move to the front, they're all straight. And as I mentioned before, I'm just running my fingers across and they're snapping back into their position like so. Now we're going to grab the heddle. That's this little teethy bit, and that's going to help us with the tension of our yarn across the loom. The bamboo looms are a little bit flexible, so I kind of take advantage of that flex and just sort of bend it a little bit so this heddle slips nice and easy under the warp threads. However, if you find that it's easier to just kind of lift up a warp thread and push it through as you go, you're more than welcome to. Sorry, my hair's tickling my face. Then we're going to slide it up to the top, a few centimeters from the top, and we're just going to sort of flick it so that it sort of stands perpendicular to the loom, and you can see those warp threads are lifted away from the loom, and that makes access to get under and around them nice and easy. So I just want to reiterate once again, if I'm going a little bit fast, don't expect you to be kind of rushing and trying to catch up with me. Please pause the video until you catch up to the next point. The next step is to create what is referred to as the header. The header is the beginning of our work. So it's a few lines in this circumstance anyway. It's a few rows, I should say, at the bottom of our loom. We're going to do 3 rows, and that's just going to be the concrete foundation that our wall hanging sits on, because we will be building our wall hanging from the bottom of the loom upwards. So we just want something for everything to sit on, including the fringe, which is this nice bit hanging off the bottom of the body of the work. So whereas we used the whole ball of yarn when we were threading our loom, we're now going to pre-measure the amounts that we need. So knowing that we need 3 rows, I'm going to measure approximately across the width of the loom 3 times. So 1, 2, 3. I always give myself a little bit more for good measure because you don't want to leave yourself short. And, you know, this is the length of yarn that I've got. So now I'm going to grab my needle, and you can either use the small hole here. Where's a good place to see it against the red? Or a larger hole. So that's the large hole is good if you've got, you know, chunky yarn. You can even use it for thin yarn if you want. A thin yarn can be a bit slippery, so what I've done is I've added a small hole at the bottom, and this is what I refer to as my little anchor hole, I suppose. So if you do have something slippery, you can feed it through that bottom hole as well, and that'll sort of stop it slipping out as you're weaving. But for the moment, I'm just threading it through the larger hole. I've got my length of yarn here, and we're ready to start weaving, and we're going to be using the plain weave technique, also known as tabbing, but most people just refer to it as plain weave. And essentially we're going under and over every second warp thread, which are these threads here, and what we create is called the weft. So technical speak is this is the warp, and then as we weave we're creating the weft. So I always just out of habit go under the first one, over the next one, under, over, under, over. Now, oh, I've done a boo-boo there. Under, over, under, over, under, over. You'll forgive me because it's upside down and back the front, because I'm showing you, I'm demonstrating. However, just to be clear, you're working like this. So you work with your loom in front of you like this, but I'll demonstrate to you like so. Okay, so before you kind of throw yourself into that, I just want to point out a couple of things. I'm not trying to kind of get my needle under the rows down here because it's quite tight at the bottom here, so it's perfectly okay to weave a bit higher up and then to push your work down once you've completed a row. Don't get into the habit of doing a few rows then pushing down. You do need to push every row down as you go. So we're just going to complete that first row, and before you kind of power ahead and sort of start pulling everything down, it's great to get into the habit of just weaving a little bit higher on the loom, then gently easing down your yarn on by pulling on each end. And what happens is you get this natural arch. That's a great indication that the tension of your yarn is correct. Now, if you were to do this, kind of pull the yarn really tight and sort of pull it down like that, eventually your whole work is going to draw in like this, and it's going to be a little bit kind of unkempt. So I'm actually lifting this yarn back up to relax it across those warp threads, once again easing it down, and that's where my handy little comb comes into play. And then I'm just going to push that down like so. The next step before we power on and start weaving more rows is to tuck this little tail back into the work, and that just neatens the work up. So I'm going to lift up this warp thread, and you can see I've tucked it behind, and there's room to probably tuck behind another one as well. So it's kind of going over and under in the opposite direction to the blow row, and I'm just going to push it down. Also, what I've made sure happens is that this end warp thread is not pulled in any way, shape or form. So the tail is literally sitting around that end warp thread. It's not pulling it at all. So if you just keep that arch technique in mind and always just kind of wrap your yarn around the edge of the warp threads, you won't get issues with your work sort of pulling in on the sides or pulling in through the middle. So we can now go ahead and complete 2 more rows because we want 3 rows in total. And where my where my yarn is sitting over the top of my warp thread, I'm then going to go under, so that my under-over action is in the opposite direction or rhythm to the row below. You may also notice that I'm holding my needle sort of perpendicular to the loom, and that just allows me to take advantage of this wedge, which I can kind of scoop under the warp threads. So the second row, I'm just sort of holding it here so I'm not kind of pulling it in, and I'm creating an arch. Obviously it's a bit of a lopsided arch, but that doesn't matter. It's still giving us that kind of tension that we're after. So I'm pushing pushing down. Once again, I'm going under because my thread is sitting over the top of the warp thread, and I'm going to complete that last row. Just hold my finger there so it just sits nicely around. Create my arch, use my comb to push it down. We've completed the 3 rows, and I'm going to trim so we've got another little tail that we can tuck in. It's a slightly different tucking technique this time because we want to lift this corner up and tuck in this section here between row number 2 and row number 3. So I'll try not to get my hands in the way so you can kind of see what I'm doing. So I've just kind of tucked it around there, and I've probably got a little bit of room to sort of pop it under the next one as well. So you can see that I've tucked it between those 2 rows, the top row and the second row. And that means that regardless of for the next row, if we started at this end or we started at this end, that the over-under rhythm is going to be exactly the same. So it's not going to cause any confusion. And that may make more sense to you as you kind of get more into your weaving. But, oh, there's a little bit of hair. It's really annoying me. But they're just some great little techniques to remember as you continue to not only weave with this wall hanging, but future wall hangings. They're just very simple little things to remember, but they will ensure that your work has a level of technical proficiency to it, and I suppose a level of neatness. So now we start to do some exciting things with our wall hanging. We're going to work on the fringe. So if you can see, the fringe starts at this point, and then we've got the body of the work. So if I hold up our loom, you can see that the body of the work sits on the loom and the fringe hangs down from the bottom of the loom. Ta-da! So we're going to start working on this fringe, and I'm going to take you through specifically the design on this fringe. But for future wall hangings, you can, kind of make it up as you see fit. So that brings us to this template that I asked you to find. It's something that's 20 centimetres long, approximately, because we're going to use it to dispense yarn. So what we're going to be doing is creating bundles of even length yarn, and then we're going to be doing some free-form bundles as well. But to begin with, I'll just show you the classic technique that I use to get a bundle. So do a bundle of 10. So you just wrap around 10 times. That's 10, I think. And then we use our scissors to chop the bundle off. And there, I'm just going to pull that out. That's attached to the ball of yarn. So there we have our bundle. So you need to create 4 bundles of 10 for the first part of our fringe. And what I will do is I'll get you to pause now to chop your 4 bundles of 10 and just lay them out in little piles. So there's one of your bundles. There's another one of your bundles. Here's another one, and here's another one. So we want 4 bundles of 10 in the cream, obviously. Okay, so you've pre-dispensed your 4 bundles, and now we're going to place them across the bottom, across the bottom of our loom. And we're going to start on the left-hand side. So to create the Rya knot, which is spelled R-Y-A, and is what essentially the knot that we use to create the fringe, we grab our first bundle, we hold it in the center like so. Then we go to our loom and isolate 2 of the warp threads. We're placing the bundle over the top of the warp threads, and then we're pulling each side of that bundle through the center of the warp threads. I'll just make sure I gather them all through. There's just a couple of shy ones. So I've got them all through the first side through, I should say, and I'm just going to reach through and grab the other side. I'm going to make sure that the bundles are relatively even. I'm not obsessing over it, and then pull down. So you can see that's our first little wire knot for our fringe. We're going to go to the next one across. So we're grabbing our other bundle. We're isolating the next two warp threads. So we've got, they're the first two and these are the next two. Once again, we're grabbing the center of the bundle over the top of the warp threads. Now it's a great tip to always remind yourself when you start to do a wire knot that the starting point is placing the center of this bundle over the top of the warp threads. It's counterintuitive. I do see a lot of people trying to shove them behind. If you always remember that the first step is to go over the top, then the rest should come naturally. So once again, we're just popping each side through, pulling all of those through. There's just one there that didn't go through, so I'm popping it through separately. Voila. Just reaching through to grab the other side. And this one's a little bit uneven, as you can see. So I'm just kind of pulling down on one side to even it up slightly before I pull the whole bundle down. And once you've done a few of these, you start to get into the rhythm of it, and you can do them actually quite quickly, which is great. So then we're going to do a loop. So this is a free form wire knot that we're creating. So whereas we started with the pre-cut yarn that we used the template for, now we're going to use a loopy bit of yarn. So if you can see on the wall hanging here that I've got this little loopy bit that's hanging down a little bit lower than these first two wire knots, which are these first two bundles, kind of sitting behind these little elements just there. So this long bit here is the next one that we're doing. And what I do is I measure. I kind of dangle it down until I'm satisfied that it's slightly longer than the rest of the fringe. So that's my measured part there. So this will be the center, this point will be the center of the bundle. So I need to double that over to know how long a piece I need, which is that long. Then I want to make that a thickness of 8 to 10. I'm going to probably go for, maybe I might start with 6, because I'm actually using a slightly thicker yarn for this demonstration than you have, but I would suggest that you use 8. So I'm folding it over until I've got 6. So I've got a long looped bundle of 6 here, but please use 8 to 10. And once again, I'm lifting up the warp thread. I'm placing the center of that looped bundle over the top, and I'm pulling each side through. Now I'm not overly concerned about whether or not it's the bottom's even, because this element is about having a bit of a more relaxed effect. Voila, that's actually a bit longer than I intended it. So you can, if you've done it a bit longer or a bit shorter, you can pull it out and kind of adjust it. But I'm just going to go with it because I'm ultimately a freeform weaver. Yes, we're following a pattern, but that doesn't bother me, the way that looks. Okay, so we're going to the next bundle across, which is another one of our pre-cut cream ones. So I'm just going to pop that in. Reaching through and pulling down. So by all means, please pause if you need to catch up, or you need to kind of rewind for a minute, just to kind of wrap your head around it if you haven't quite grasped the action to create the rye knot. And then the next one that we're doing is another loop one, but it's going to be in our feature yarn, which is the skein of the variegated yarn that's in the pack. So once again, we're going to measure about how long we think we want that loop to be. So maybe about that long. And I'm going to fold it over so I've got the full length, because this will be our midpoint here. And I'm just going to double it over twice. So I've got 4 strands, or a thickness of 4, whatever makes more sense to you, and trim off the skein. So there you go, I've got a thickness of 4 there, and I've got the loops. I'm holding the center, and once again I'm repeating that rye knot action. The next one over. I've given it a little twist because sometimes that helps just control the yarn a bit more to get it around and through the warp threads. This action should be easier for you holding it like so and doing your rye knots this way. It's a little bit awkward for me doing it like this, but really, it's not an issue, like it's not a problem. And there we have that looped effect, so you can start to see it kind of forming now. Then here we have another loop, another white loop. So we've got plain rye knot, plain rye knot, looped rye knot, plain rye knot, looped rye knot in the variegated. Now we're doing another long cream rye knot. So I've pre-measured this one just for the sake of quickness. Once again, you just sort of measure it down, fold the yarn over, and then pop each side through. So it's quite long, much longer than I anticipated, but you know, stuff happens. And last but not least, we're going to our 4th pre-cut bundle, and that will be our last little rye knot section. Voila. So we've just done one quite thick row of rye knots for the fringe. Sometimes you might want to do, if you start designing your own wall hangings, you might want to do 2 rows. So if you do another row on top of your bottom row, then you would skip this first warp thread and then go in between, and that would sit nicely just in between like that. Then the next 2 across, in between, so on and so forth. Now we are going to pop a couple of little feature knots on top of this, but we're not doing a whole row. So what I will get you to do now, so I'll just pop that down, is to dispense a taupe bundle using your template. And this is another bundle of yarn, but we're only doing a thickness of 5. So we're going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So it's just a smaller, thinner bundle this time. And the placement of this from the left-hand side is 2 in. Oops, I just accidentally popped that down. So we're not going, this is the first one, and this is the second one, and this is where we're placing this one. So once again, isolate those warp threads and pop each side through the center. Just evening it up before I pull it down. There we go. Now we're going to do another loopy in the variegated, but we're doing that here. And I'm only going to be doing this one as long as the most of the fringe. So probably I'm going to use my my kind of the general and approximate length for this one. So I think that'll be my midpoint. I'm just going to double it over so that I've got my full length, and I'm just going to make this, I think this one is just a single or a double thickness actually. So it's actually only just a thickness of 2. And then that goes in this first section here. And once again with the loops, you don't have to be overly concerned about whether or not they're even, because the nature of the looped fringe is that it is a little bit more kind of boho and there's less precision involved, and if it's slightly uneven, it actually kind of looks better. So we've done our fringe. So exciting. So a little flourish that I added to this wall hanging is the bow around the taupe rye knot. So to achieve that, it's very simple. It's literally just tying a bow around that bundle. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to lift up that taupe bundle that I've popped in and just move it up and away from the other fringe, and I'm laying a pre-cut piece of yarn that's about 30 centimeters long and around maybe a bit below the midpoint towards the bottom. I'm just tying that single length of yarn into a bow around the warp thread, like so. Now this is an optional extra, I suppose. You don't have to do that, but it looks kind of cute, so that's part of the design. But the thing about my design is that you can make it your design and make a decision to not add it if you like. Now that we have created our fabulous fringe, we're going to lock all that in with a few rows of the cream. We're basically going to repeat what we did for the header, which are those first 3 rows, and it's a good little revision exercise in creating that arch for the tension and tucking the ends in. So I've just got my loom in front of me here, and I'm just going to approximately measure 3 rows across. 1, 2, 3, and trim. Give myself a little bit extra, as I mentioned before, because we don't want to be left short. I'm grabbing my tapestry needle and I'm threading the needle like so. And now we're going to start weaving on top of our fringe. So I'm just going to pull these 2 top little elements that we added down so that the whole thing is relatively even across. And I'm going to once again weave up a little bit higher, just so that I'm not kind of confused by the fact that those rye knots have pulled the warp threads in together. Now just a quick little note on that. I know I kind of harp on about not sort of having anything pulling. However, obviously the nature of the warp thread is that it does pull the nature of the rye knot is that it does pull in the two warp threads. There's not really anything that can be done about that, but as long as from this point onwards you sort of maintain that principle of not sort of drawing things in. Okay, so our first row, we've just woven up a little bit higher. I've got my little tail sticking out and I'm just gently easing down on each side. I've got that arch happening and I'm going to push down with my comb. Then I'm grabbing the little tail and I'm tucking that back in to neaten the edge of the work, like so. That just tucked under one of the warp threads. As a bit of revision, where my thread is sitting, where my yarn is sitting over the top of this warp thread, I'm now going to scoop around and under it and then go back in the opposite direction, and then we want to complete 3 rows of this like we did underneath all of these rye knots. As always, just pause if you feel like you need to catch up or just catch your breath or have a cup of tea. Just popping my finger there, easing down, pushing down with the comb, and then I'm going to trim another little tail, and I'm lifting up to fold that in between the second and the third row. And that's just a great little practice and habit to get into each time you finish off a block of weaving. And there we have everything nicely locked in, and we're ready to do the body of our work, which is totes exciting.